Emily Carter had imagined many versions of this day. In some versions, Daniel cried when he held their babies for the first time. In others, he kissed her forehead and whispered that she was the strongest woman he had ever known. Sometimes she imagined the four of them leaving the hospital together under the warm October sun, exhausted but happy, beginning the next chapter of their lives. None of her versions included doctors running down hallways. None included alarms. None included the words, "Your son is in critical condition." 23 hours earlier, Emily had been laughing through contractions while Daniel answered emails beside her hospital bed. "You're working?" she asked between breaths. Daniel didn't look up from his phone. "Tokyo Market's open in 40 minutes. Emily rolled her eyes. "Our children are literally being born. Exactly why I need this quarter to go well." He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly. 2 babies aren't cheap. At the time, she thought he was nervous. Looking back years later, she would realize something important. Daniel had never truly been present. Not during their engagement, not during their wedding, not during the pregnancy. His body was there. His attention belonged to Wall Street. The labor became complicated shortly after midnight. Doctors rushed into the room. Machines beeped. Voices overlapped. Emily remembered flashes rather than moments, bright lights, masks, instructions. Then finally, a cry, a beautiful cry. "Congratulations," a nurse said. "A little girl?" Emily smiled through tears. "Lily." Daniel looked up from his phone and smiled for the first time all night. "She's perfect." Then came silence. Too much silence. The second baby wasn't crying. Doctors moved faster. The room changed. A nurse carried the newborn away. Emily saw wires, masks, more doctors entering. "What's happening?" No one answered immediately. Her heart sank. "What's happening to my son?" A doctor finally approached. "Mrs. Carter, your son has a severe heart rhythm abnormality." The words sounded foreign, meaningless. "We're moving him to intensive care." Emily looked toward Daniel. For the first time all night, she saw fear in his eyes. "What does that mean?" she whispered. The doctor hesitated. "He'll need emergency surgery." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her. "Will he survive?" The doctor nodded. "We believe so." The room became quiet. "But he will require a pacemaker." Daniel stared at the floor. Emily stared at her son, tiny, fragile, fighting for every breath. She reached through the incubator opening and touched his hand. His fingers wrapped around hers. At that moment, she made a promise. No matter what happened, no matter how hard life became, she would never abandon him. She looked toward Daniel. "I know this is scary." He nodded slowly. "We'll get through it together." Daniel didn't answer. That should have frightened her more than the diagnosis itself. 3 days later, Emily sat alone in her recovery room, holding Lily while staring through the glass into the neonatal intensive care unit. Noah had survived surgery. Doctors were optimistic. His prognosis was excellent. With modern medicine, he would likely live a completely normal life. Emily felt relief for the first time in days. The door opened. Daniel entered. Not alone. A man in a gray suit followed him carrying a leather briefcase. Emily frowned. "Who is this?" The man offered a professional smile. "My name is Richard Bennett." He placed documents on the hospital table. "I represent your husband?" Emily looked at Daniel, confused, then at the papers, then back at Daniel. Her blood turned cold. Divorce petition. Her hands began shaking. "What is this?" Daniel crossed his arms. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." He looked away. "I can't do this life." Emily laughed in disbelief. What life? He pointed toward the NICU. That life. Emily stared at him. Our son needs us. Our son needs doctors. The sentence hit harder than a slap. Daniel continued speaking with the detached tone of someone discussing quarterly earnings. My career is finally taking off. I've spent years building momentum. I can't spend the next 20 years tied to hospitals and surgeries and specialists. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're leaving because our child is sick? Daniel sighed. You don't understand how this works. Partners notice distractions. Clients notice distractions. Promotion committees notice distractions. His expression hardened. I'm not anchoring my career to a broken kid and a housewife. The room fell silent. Emily felt something inside her shatter. Not anger, not sadness. Something deeper. The death of the person she thought she married. You don't mean that. I do. He reached into his pocket and placed a bank statement on the table. I transferred my portion of the money yesterday. Emily looked at the statement. Their savings account, empty. $38,000 gone. That was for the babies. I need liquidity too. You stole from your children. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he straightened his tie. There are signing instructions on the final page. Then he walked out. Emily watched him leave. Not once did he look through the glass toward Noah. Not once. Not ever again. That night, Emily sat beside her son's incubator and cried until there were no tears left. Then she looked at him. Tiny fingers, tiny heartbeat, tiny chest rising and falling. And she made a second promise. One day, somehow, she would build a life so strong that nobody would ever be able to abandon her children again. The first bill arrived 11 days after Noah came home from the hospital. Emily opened the envelope while rocking him to sleep with one hand and feeding Lily with the other. $14,872.63. She stared at the number. There would be more bills, specialists, medication, follow-up appointments, pacemaker monitoring, emergency visits. The number on the paper wasn't a bill. It was a mountain, and she was standing at the bottom of it with 2 newborn babies and a checking account containing less than $400. For a long time, she simply sat there, not crying, not panicking, just staring, because some problems are too large for emotions. They simply exist, like gravity, like winter, like debt. Lily finished her bottle and fell asleep against her shoulder. Noah stirred in his crib. Emily stood up and walked toward the window of her tiny apartment. The city lights stretched endlessly into the distance. Millions of people, millions of lives, millions of problems. Somehow people survive them every day. So would she. She had to, because 2 tiny people were depending on her. The next 6 months blurred together. Sleep became a memory. Coffee became a food group. Every day followed the same routine. Feed Lily, feed Noah, check Noah's medication, change diapers, wash bottles, call insurance companies, argue over paperwork, attend doctor's appointments, repeat, repeat, repeat. Sometimes she forgot whether she had eaten. Sometimes she forgot what day it was. Once she put orange juice in the cupboard and cereal in the refrigerator. Another time she searched 20 minutes for her phone while holding it in her hand. Exhaustion became normal. One afternoon, her friend Sarah visited. You look terrible, Sarah said honestly. Thank you. I mean it as a compliment. Emily laughed for the first time in weeks. You know what I mean. Sarah looked around the apartment. Baby supplies covered nearly every surface. Medical paperwork occupied the kitchen table. Laundry waited patiently on the couch. When was the last time you slept more than 3 hours? Emily thought about it. I honestly don't remember. Sarah hesitated. Have you heard from Daniel? Emily shook her head. Not once. Not even about the twins? No. Child support? He hired lawyers. Sarah closed her eyes in frustration. Unbelievable! Emily looked toward Noah sleeping in his carrier. He never even asked if Noah survived. The room became quiet. 3 months later, Emily saw Daniel's photograph in a business magazine while waiting in a doctor's office. Rising star of Wall Street, future managing director candidate. The article mentioned his impressive deal record, his growing reputation, his luxury penthouse purchase, his engagement to social media entrepreneur Victoria Lang. Emily stared at the smiling photograph. He looked happy, very happy. For a moment, anger flared inside her. Then she looked at Noah. He was asleep in her lap. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily. The scar from his surgery peeked through the collar of his shirt. She folded the magazine closed. Some people lose their humanity chasing success. She would not make the same mistake. Money became the problem that followed her everywhere. The rent increased. Medical expenses multiplied. Savings disappeared. One night she sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a notebook. The numbers refused to cooperate. Income, expenses, debt, minimum payments. The equation always ended the same way. Negative, negative, negative. She needed work, real work. But daycare for twins cost more than most jobs paid. She applied anyway. Receptionist, assistant, bookkeeper, customer service. Nothing. Either employers didn't want a mother with 2 infants, or the schedule simply didn't work. Then one evening, she saw an advertisement. Part-time data entry clerk, night shift, financial records processing, flexible hours. Emily almost ignored it. Finance wasn't her world, but numbers were. Numbers had always been her world. As a child, she solved math problems for fun. In college, she had planned to major in mathematics before life interrupted those plans. She applied. 3 days later, she received a call. The office was smaller than she expected. Old carpets, old computers, old furniture. A faded sign on the door read, Rosen Investment Analytics. The owner looked about 70 years old. White hair, sharp eyes, calm voice. Victor Rosen reviewed her resume. Mathematics major? Only 2 years. Why did you leave? Emily hesitated. I got married. Victor nodded as though he understood more than she had said. You have experience with spreadsheets? Yes. Can you work nights? Yes. Can you start tomorrow? Emily blinked. That's it? Victor smiled. Mrs. Carter, I run a data company, not a nuclear facility. For the first time in months, she laughed. You have the job. The schedule was brutal. Emily's mother watched the twins from 7 in the evening until midnight. Emily worked until 2 in the morning. She returned home, fed Noah, fed Lily, slept for 3 hours. Started over. Most people would have broken. Sometimes she thought she might. But every morning, Noah smiled when he saw her. Every morning, Lily reached for her arms. Every morning, she remembered why she kept going. The work itself was simple. Input market reports, process company filings, organize transaction records, update databases. Most employees considered it boring. Emily found it fascinating. Numbers told stories. Stock prices reflected fear. Shipping reports predicted shortages. Commodity prices hinted at future inflation. Patterns existed everywhere. Most people simply never noticed them. One night, she frowned at her screen. Something looked wrong. She checked again, and again. Still wrong. She walked toward Victor's office. Do you have a minute? Victor looked up from a report. Of course. Emily pointed at the screen. The shipping data and commodity forecasts disagree. Victor adjusted his glasses. What do you mean? Shipping activity from Southeast Asia has slowed by almost 4%. So, commodity prices should follow within 2 months. Victor raised an eyebrow. They haven't. Not yet. He studied her for several moments. Interesting. 3 months later, commodity prices collapsed, exactly as she predicted. Victor called her into his office. How did you know? Emily shrugged. The numbers looked uncomfortable. The numbers looked uncomfortable? She nodded. They were arguing with each other. Victor stared at her. Most analysts with expensive degrees couldn't find that signal if I highlighted it in red. Emily smiled awkwardly. I guess I just noticed patterns. Victor leaned back in his chair. No. He shook his head slowly. You do more than notice them. Over the following months, it happened again and again and again. Currency movements, supply chains, retail inventories, employment trends. Emily saw connections nobody else saw. She predicted market movements with frightening consistency. Not because she guessed, because she listened. The numbers always spoke. Most people were simply too busy talking to hear them. One night, Victor placed a thick textbook on her desk. Advanced Financial Modeling. Emily looked up. What's this? Homework. I didn't enroll in a class? Victor smiled. You don't need a class. He pointed toward the book. You need tools. She looked at the cover. I don't know anything about finance. Victor laughed. Neither did half of Wall Street when they started. He leaned forward. The difference is, they learned finance. You understand numbers. Finance can be taught. What you have can't. Emily stared at the book. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Possibility. That night, after putting the twins to bed, she opened the textbook. Midnight became 1 o'clock. 1 became 2. 2 became 3. When she finally looked at the clock, birds were already beginning to sing outside. She closed the book, exhausted, excited, alive. For the first time since the hospital room, for the first time since the divorce papers, for the first time since Daniel walked away, Emily Carter saw a future that wasn't about survival. It was about building. And somewhere deep inside, a very dangerous idea began to grow. What if she wasn't rebuilding her old life? What if she was building something much bigger? Something no one saw coming, including the man who had left her behind. By the time the twins turned 3, Emily Carter had developed a strange reputation inside Rosen Investment Analytics. She was never introduced to clients. She didn't attend meetings. She wasn't an analyst. Officially, she was still a night shift data clerk. Unofficially, people had started calling her something else. The human indicator. Not to her face. Mostly in whispers. Mostly after she was right. Again, and again, and again. Oil prices are going to fall. Emily said it casually while entering shipment reports into the database. 2 analysts nearby exchanged amused looks. One laughed. Middle East tensions are increasing. The market disagrees with you. Emily nodded. I know. Then why will prices fall? She pointed at her screen. Commercial storage demand dropped in 6 major ports. So, refineries are slowing purchases. Shipping insurance rates are falling. Tankers are waiting longer before unloading. The analyst frowned. Those things aren't related. Emily smiled politely. They are. 6 weeks later, oil prices dropped 12%. The analyst bought her coffee. 3 months later, she predicted a retail slowdown. 4 months after that, she identified a currency imbalance. 7 months later, she warned Victor about an overvalued technology stock that collapsed shortly afterward. Eventually, Victor stopped asking why. If Emily saw something? He listened. One evening, Victor closed the office door behind him. Sit down. Emily looked nervous. Am I in trouble? Quite the opposite. He handed her several printed reports. What do you see? Emily scanned the pages. Bond yields, container shipping, agricultural exports, consumer debt, employment numbers, housing permits. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she looked up. Something is wrong. Victor smiled. What? These sectors shouldn't move together. But they are. She pointed to several charts. Credit stress is building. Manufacturing confidence is falling. Transportation demand is weakening. Victor nodded. And? Emily looked at him. The market is lying. Victor leaned back. Explain. She took a deep breath. Investors react to headlines. Markets react to information. But economies react to behavior. She pointed at the charts. People are becoming afraid before they know they're afraid. Victor stared at her. That wasn't finance. That was psychology, economics, statistics, behavioral science, pattern recognition, combined. He had spent 40 years in markets. He had never heard anyone explain it that way. That night, Victor asked a question that changed everything. What if we taught a computer to think like you? Emily laughed. That's impossible. Why? Because I don't know how I think. Victor smiled. Neither do chess grandmasters. Computers learned anyway. The idea stayed with her. For weeks. Then months. What if patterns could be taught? What if markets left clues before major events? What if fear could be measured? What if panic could be predicted? At home, life remained difficult. Very difficult. Noah's medical appointments continued. Battery checks, monitoring appointments, cardiology visits. Each one terrified Emily. Each one reminded her how fragile life could be. One afternoon, Noah sat on the examination table swinging his legs. Mom? Yes? Am I broken? The question hit harder than any market crash ever would. Emily forced herself to smile. Why would you ask that? He pointed to his chest. Because I have machine parts. Emily sat beside him. Do you know what race cars have? What? Special engines. He nodded. Do you know what astronauts have? What? Special suits. Another nod. She touched his chest gently. And do you know what superheroes have? Noah smiled. What? Special equipment. He looked thoughtful. So, I'm a superhero. Emily grinned. You have a titanium-powered heart assistant. That sounds pretty heroic to me. Noah laughed. For the rest of the week, he introduced himself to people as Noah Carter, superhero. Lily developed differently. Where Noah loved science and machines, Lily loved people. Books, stories, music. She inherited Emily's kindness. Noah inherited her curiosity. Together, they inherited her determination. Emily watched them sleeping one night and realized something important. She wasn't fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to build opportunities. For them. For their future. For their dreams. The following winter, Victor invited Emily to sit in on an investment meeting. She assumed he needed notes taken. Instead, he introduced her to the room. This is Emily Carter. One investor smiled politely. Your new assistant? Victor shook his head. No. He pointed toward a chart on the wall. She's the reason we exited our positions before the correction. The room became quiet. One executive frowned. Her? Victor nodded. Emily predicted it 8 weeks early. The executive laughed. Based on what? Victor smiled. That's the interesting part, Emily answered quietly. Shipping routes. Silence. Shipping routes? Container delays. Insurance premiums. Port activity? The executive stared at her. You predicted a correction using shipping schedules? Emily shrugged. People stop buying things before companies report lower earnings. The room remained silent. Victor almost laughed, because she had just summarized an entire economic theory in one sentence. After the meeting, Victor walked her to the elevator. You know what your problem is? Emily frowned. I have several. You think too small. She looked confused. You believe you're a woman who understands numbers? Aren't I? Victor shook his head. Emily, there are thousands of analysts on Wall Street. There are thousands of mathematicians. There are thousands of economists. But I have met exactly one person who can see markets the way you do. He looked directly at her. Stop acting like you're borrowing someone else's chair. You belong in the room. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop, created a blank document, typed 3 words at the top. Predicting human fear. Then she stared at them. Markets weren't numbers. Markets were people. People became greedy. People became scared. People became irrational. And irrational behavior left patterns. Digital fingerprints. Tiny signals hidden inside oceans of information. Most investors looked at prices. Maybe they were looking at the wrong thing. Maybe prices were the result. Maybe behavior was the cause. Emily began typing. Consumer confidence, freight movement, insurance claims, commodity futures, employment trends, credit defaults, social sentiment, search behavior, weather disruptions, supply chain pressure, hundreds of variables, thousands. The list kept growing. Outside her apartment window, the city slept. Inside, something extraordinary had begun. Not a company, not a fund, not even an algorithm. An idea powerful enough to change Wall Street forever. An idea born from sleepless nights, hospital bills, and survival. An idea created by a woman the financial world didn't even know existed. Somewhere across Manhattan, Daniel Harper stood on the balcony of his luxury penthouse, celebrating another promotion. Champagne glasses clinked. Investors laughed. The city sparkled below. He believed he was winning. He had no idea that in a tiny apartment across the river, the woman he abandoned had just started building the machine that would one day own his future. And she didn't know it yet either. The first version of Emily's algorithm failed in exactly 11 seconds. She still remembered the number because she had timed it. 11 seconds after running the model, her computer froze. 23 seconds later, it crashed. 30 seconds after that, every unsaved change disappeared. Emily stared at the blank screen. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, because after everything life had already thrown at her, losing a few hours of work barely qualified as a problem anymore. Behind her, Noah looked up from the living room floor. Did the computer break? Emily smiled. No. Did you break it? Possibly. Noah nodded seriously. That means you're learning. Emily blinked. Who told you that? My science teacher. He thought for a moment. Also you. By then, the twins were 6 years old. Life had stabilized. Not become easy, never easy, but stable. Noah's health had improved dramatically. His cardiologist was optimistic. His pacemaker checks had become routine rather than terrifying. Lily had discovered a love for music and spent hours practicing piano in the corner of their apartment. Their home wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs. More importantly, it felt safe. A word that had become more valuable than expensive furniture or designer kitchens. Every night after the twins went to sleep, Emily opened her laptop. From 10 in the evening until 2 or 3 in the morning, she studied. Programming, statistics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantitative finance, pattern recognition. The internet became her university. Books became her professors. Persistence became her tuition. At first, she understood almost nothing. Terms like neural networks and stochastic processes felt like foreign languages. Sometimes she spent 6 hours solving problems that experienced programmers solved in 6 minutes. Sometimes she considered quitting. Then she remembered hospital bills, divorce papers, Daniel's words, broken kid, housewife. The memory usually bought her another 3 hours of motivation. Victor noticed the changes immediately. "You look exhausted." Emily looked up from her desk. "I am exhausted. More exhausted than usual." She smiled. "I'm learning to code." Victor nearly spilled his coffee. "Why?" Emily hesitated. "I think markets leave clues before crashes." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Continue." "I think fear spreads through the economy long before investors notice." She leaned forward. "I want to build something that can see those signals." Victor remained silent. "An early warning system?" "More than that." "What then?" Emily searched for the words. "A weather forecast for human behavior." Victor stared at her, then smiled. "That might be the most interesting sentence I've heard all year." The project consumed her. She named the program Argus. After the giant in mythology that never slept, it felt appropriate. The first version analyzed 23 variables, the second analyzed 62, the third analyzed over 300. Shipping data, credit card defaults, fuel consumption, manufacturing output, freight pricing, commodity flows, housing permits, weather events, employment trends, insurance claims, anything that reflected human behavior, anything that moved before markets moved, anything that whispered before panic started screaming. Most of the signals meant nothing. Some meant everything. The challenge was figuring out which was which. The failures arrived constantly. Prediction errors, false signals, data corruption, system crashes. Weeks of work disappeared overnight. One particularly disastrous version predicted 3 market crashes in 6 months. None happened. Another model predicted absolutely nothing, which somehow felt worse. Emily closed her laptop and buried her face in her hands. "This is impossible." From the kitchen, Lily looked up from her homework. "What's impossible?" "The computer won't listen to me." Lily considered this carefully. "Maybe you're explaining it badly?" Emily laughed. "Thank you for the confidence. It's what you tell Noah when he gets frustrated with math." Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. Children had an irritating habit of repeating wisdom back to adults at inconvenient times. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not with celebration, certainly not with dramatic music playing in the background. Emily simply noticed something strange. Every failed prediction shared the same problem. The algorithm treated people like numbers, but people weren't numbers. People were emotional, irrational, predictable in irrational ways. Fear spread like disease. Confidence spread like fire. Markets didn't move because spreadsheets changed. Spreadsheets changed because human beings changed. She deleted nearly 6 months of work, started over, and built something entirely different. Instead of asking, "What are markets doing?" the algorithm asked, "What are people feeling?" Suddenly, everything changed. Consumer spending patterns shifted before recessions. Shipping demand weakened before earnings reports collapsed. Small business borrowing slowed before unemployment increased. Human behavior moved first. Markets followed later. For the first time, Argus began seeing around corners. Victor walked into the office one morning to find Emily asleep at her desk. Beside her sat hundreds of pages of charts and handwritten notes. He quietly placed a blanket over her shoulders. Then his eyes landed on the screen. A prediction model, probability outputs, risk indicators, stress measurements. Victor slowly sat down. He had worked in finance for 43 years. He had seen brilliant traders, brilliant economists, brilliant mathematicians. He had never seen anything like this. When Emily woke up, he was still reading. "You built this?" She rubbed her eyes. "It's probably wrong." Victor looked at her. "No," he pointed at the screen. "This is either wrong or revolutionary." 3 months later, Argus issued its first major warning. Credit stress increasing. Commercial shipping slowing. Consumer borrowing weakening. Probability of market correction within 6 months. 82%. Victor studied the report. "You trust this?" Emily stared at the numbers. "Yes." He nodded. "Then we're reducing exposure." Several investors called him crazy. Others called him paranoid. One investor withdrew his money entirely. Victor ignored them. 5 months later, the market fell nearly 18%. Rosen Investment Analytics avoided almost all of the damage. Clients called Victor a genius. Victor corrected them immediately. "It wasn't me." Word spread quietly. A mysterious forecasting system. An impossible risk model. A machine that saw crashes before they happened. Victor never explained where it came from. Emily preferred it that way. She had no interest in attention. Attention attracted questions. Questions attracted competitors. Competitors attracted Wall Street. And Wall Street had already taken enough from her. One evening, Victor invited her to dinner. Halfway through the meal, he asked, "What do you want?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean? Money? Power? Recognition?" She thought carefully. Finally, she answered, "Security." Victor smiled. "For yourself?" She looked out the restaurant window. "For my children." He nodded. "Then let me give you some advice." She waited. Never build a castle on someone else's land. Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means if this algorithm is as valuable as I think it is." He leaned forward. "Don't give it away to people who already have enough." That sentence followed her home, followed her into bed, followed her into work. Don't build a castle on someone else's land. For weeks, she ignored it. For months, she pretended not to think about it. Then one afternoon, Noah walked into the living room carrying his latest school assignment. "What does your mom do for work?" the paper asked. Noah had written, "My mom helps people understand the future." Emily read the sentence 3 times. Then she looked at Argus running on her laptop. Streaming probabilities, risk signals, patterns, predictions, helping people understand the future. Maybe Noah understood her work better than she did. Across Manhattan, Daniel Harper stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Vice President now, Managing Director soon. His career was exactly where he wanted it. His penthouse had doubled in value. His social circle included billionaires. Business magazines quoted him. Financial news channels invited him. By every traditional measurement, he had won. His assistant entered the office. "Sir, Rosen Investment Analytics exited the technology sector 6 weeks ago." Daniel barely looked up. "So?" "The market correction this morning hit almost every major fund." He frowned. "How did they know?" "No one knows." Daniel shrugged. "Luck." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, this is the 4th time." Daniel returned to his paperwork. "There are no ghosts in the market." He smiled slightly. "Eventually, everyone's lucky streak ends. Thousands of miles of fiber optic cables away, on a laptop sitting in a modest apartment kitchen. Argus quietly updated its models. Learning, improving, watching. The ghost in the market had only just opened its eyes. The first time Emily Carter heard the phrase Apex Quant Capital, it wasn't from a banker or investor. It was from Noah. He was 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, watching her laptop screen as lines of code and market charts flickered across it. "That looks like a superhero base," he said. Emily smiled without looking up. "It's not a base, it's just data." Noah tilted his head. "Then why does it feel powerful?" That question stayed with her longer than she expected. Argus had become something no longer small enough to hide. What began as a late-night experiment had grown into a system that quietly influenced millions in exposure decisions through Victor's firm. It didn't just predict markets anymore. It shaped them. Funds that listened avoided disasters. Funds that ignored it suffered losses. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rosen Investment Analytics began outperforming everyone, not slightly, significantly, too significantly. Victor noticed what others did not dare to say aloud. "This can't stay here," he said one evening. Emily looked up from her screen. "What do you mean?" He placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed performance reports, risk exposure charts, and client growth projections. "This is no longer a small advantage," he said. "This is market-moving intelligence." Emily closed her laptop slowly. "That's not what I built it for." Victor studied her. "Then what did you build it for?" She hesitated. "Safety. For who?" "For people who don't get second chances." Silence filled the room. Victor leaned forward. "Then you already know the problem?" Emily frowned. "No." "Yes," he said quietly. "If something this powerful exists," he tapped the folder, "someone will eventually take it." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of clarity. Argus wasn't just a tool anymore. It was becoming a weapon, and weapons didn't stay hidden forever. They got found, used, owned. The breaking point came 6 months later. A major hedge fund collapsed after failing to anticipate a global credit tightening cycle. The same cycle Argus had predicted. The financial press called it the invisible forecast. No one knew the source, but people started asking questions. Too many questions. Emails began arriving. Anonymous inquiries, recruiters, fund managers, investment banks. Then came the meeting request. Goldman Ridge Capital, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. They wanted access. Not collaboration. Access. Victor read the email twice, then looked at Emily. "This is it," she frowned. "What is?" "The moment you stop being invisible." Emily refused the meeting, at first. Then a second request arrived, then a third. Each more aggressive, each more curious, each more urgent. Finally, Victor said something she didn't expect. "You are trying to protect people," he said. "Yes." "But right now?" He paused. "You are protecting them from something that will exist whether you participate or not." Emily looked at him. "I don't understand." Victor exhaled. "If you don't control how Argus enters the world," he pointed at the screen, "someone else will decide how it is used." That sentence changed everything. 2 weeks later, Apex Quant Capital was formed. Not publicly, not loudly, not even legally complete in the traditional sense. It started as a shell fund under Victor's structure. But the core intelligence belonged to Emily. She chose the name herself, Apex, the highest point, Quant, because numbers were still the language. Capital, because survival in finance always required it, but in her mind, it meant something else. Apex was where you stood when you refused to fall again. The first trades were small, carefully disguised. Invisible positions, micro allocations. testing the system under real-world pressure. Argus adapted instantly. It didn't just predict markets, it learned them. Within 3 months, Apex Quant achieved returns that quietly outperformed nearly every mid-tier hedge fund in North America. Within 6 months, it stopped being ignored. Within 9 months, it became feared. Daniel Harper noticed something unusual during a quarterly review. His firm had lost positions it shouldn't have lost. Not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently. Small inefficiencies, timing errors, prediction gaps. He frowned at the report. "Who is trading against us?" he asked. No one had an answer. "Retail?" someone suggested. Daniel shook his head. "This is structured." A pause. "Professional." Another pause. "Adaptive." He leaned back. "There's a new player." Emily, meanwhile, sat in her apartment watching Argus evolve. The system was no longer just analyzing data. It was predicting reactions to predictions. Second-order effects, then third-order, then behavioral feedback loops. Markets were no longer linear. They were emotional ecosystems, and Argus was learning to navigate them. Noah walked in one evening holding a school science project. "I think your computer is famous," he said. Emily laughed. "It's not famous." "It is at school." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "No one knows who built the thing that keeps beating Wall Street." Emily froze slightly. "That's not what people say." Noah nodded. "They call it a ghost." That word landed differently now. Ghost, invisible, untraceable, unstoppable. Victor grew more serious. "We need to formalize Apex," he said. Emily shook her head. "It already exists." "Not in the way it needs to." He placed another document on the table. Regulatory exposure, institutional scaling, capital inflows. Emily didn't look at it. "I don't want control from outside investors." Victor sighed. "Then they will force their way in." She looked up. "They can try." Victor studied her carefully. "You're not thinking like a founder." "I'm thinking like someone who's been betrayed before." That silence said more than anything else. The decision came after a single event, a sudden, unexplained market volatility spike. Argus had predicted it. Apex positioned correctly. Profits were significant. But the reaction afterward was louder than the result. 3 major funds demanded explanations. 2 banks requested meetings. 1 regulator opened an inquiry into unusual predictive consistency. Emily read the notice, then closed it. "They're getting closer," Victor said. "Yes." "What do you want to do?" Emily looked at the screen, at Argus, at the patterns, at the system she had built from exhaustion, grief, and necessity. Then she answered, "We stop hiding." Victor frowned. "That's dangerous." Emily nodded. "I know." A pause, then she added quietly, "But I didn't survive everything I survived just to stay invisible forever." That night she sat alone after the twins fell asleep. The apartment was quiet. For once not chaotic, not urgent, just still. She opened a blank document, typed 1 line. Apex, Quant Capital, Public Launch Strategy, then stopped. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. Not the exhausted hospital mother anymore. Not the struggling clerk. Something else. Something built slowly over years of pain, numbers, and persistence. Outside, the city glowed like a living circuit board. Somewhere in that glow was Daniel Harper. Still unaware. Still certain of his world. Still standing on a foundation that was about to be rewritten. Emily closed the laptop, whispered to herself, "Let's see how strong your world really is." And for the first time since everything began, she wasn't building in the shadows anymore. She was preparing to step into the light. The first rule of Wall Street is simple. If you can't see who is beating you, you assume they don't exist. That assumption lasted exactly 43 days. Daniel Harper stared at the performance dashboard in silence. Red, too much red, not catastrophic, not dramatic. Just consistent underperformance in places that should not be underperforming. He leaned forward. "Show me attribution." The analyst beside him hesitated. "We can't isolate it cleanly." Daniel looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means we don't know what's causing it." A pause. Daniel's voice sharpened. "That's not an answer." The analyst swallowed. "It behaves like something is adjusting ahead of us." Daniel frowned. "Algorithms don't anticipate, they react." "Yes," the analyst said carefully. "This one doesn't behave like that." Silence. Then Daniel spoke quietly. "There's a new fund." Across the river, Emily Carter was not celebrating. She was watching. Argus had entered a new phase. Not prediction anymore. Competition. The system was now adapting to other systems. High-frequency trading signals. Institutional positioning models. Sentiment engines. It was learning the behavior of other machines and adjusting faster than humans could react. Victor stood behind her. "You see it too," he said. Emily nodded. "They're starting to notice." "Good or bad?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, both. The first public mention came in a financial blog. A single anonymous post. "There is a fund consistently front-running macro shifts, not through insider information. Through something else. It feels like it sees liquidity before it moves." Within hours, it was deleted, but screenshots survived. Within days, traders began calling it the Ghost Fund. Within weeks, it had a name. Apex Quant Capital. Even though no one had officially confirmed it existed, Daniel read the name for the first time in a private email chain. A junior analyst had attached it. Subject line: "We may be competing with Apex." Daniel froze. He typed slowly. "What is Apex?" The reply came minutes later. "We don't know." Another message followed. "But it's hurting us." That sentence bothered him more than anything else. Not losing, not risk, but not knowing. Emily, meanwhile, was building structure around chaos. Apex was no longer a secret experiment. It was a living system. Capital flowed in carefully controlled channels. Positions were split across jurisdictions. Risk exposure was distributed across models that updated hourly. Argus had become less like software and more like an ecosystem. Lily once asked her, "Why do you work at night?" Emily looked up from her laptop. "Because the world is quieter then." "Is that when your computer thinks?" Emily smiled. "Yes." Lily tilted her head. "Does it ever get tired?" Emily hesitated. "No." "Lucky," Lily said, and went back to her book. Emily watched her for a moment longer than usual, then returned to the screen. The real escalation began when Apex avoided a global market shock that hit every major hedge fund. Every one, except a handful of smaller firms that followed similar patterns. The industry noticed. Not the win, the pattern. 3 firms independently confirmed the same anomaly. Apex was exiting positions before macro shifts became visible. One senior trader said it best during a conference call. "It's like they're reading the economy before it writes itself." That phrase spread. Fast. Too fast. Daniel called an emergency meeting. "We are dealing with a systematic intelligence gap," he said. A senior partner laughed. "That's impossible." Daniel didn't smile. "Then explain the losses." No one answered. He tapped the table. "I want full surveillance on this Apex entity." Another partner frowned. "We don't even know if it's real." Daniel looked directly at him. "It's real enough to take our money." Silence. Then Daniel added, "And that makes it real enough to hunt." That word changed the tone. Hunt. Not compete, not analyze. Hunt. Victor saw it first. Regulatory inquiries, data requests, unusual market surveillance patterns. "We've moved from invisible to visible," he said. Emily didn't look away from her screen. "That was always going to happen." Victor frowned. "You're calm." "I'm prepared." "For what?" She finally turned. "For them to come for it." Victor exhaled. "Then we need protection." Emily nodded slowly. "We need structure." That night, she made a decision. Apex would no longer be just a fund. It would become an institution. Not just Argus, not just capital, but infrastructure. A system too large to quietly remove, too distributed to erase, too embedded to control. Victor read the plan. "This is ambitious," Emily corrected him. "This is necessary." The turning point came unexpectedly. A leaked trade report surfaced in Europe. It showed unusual correlation patterns between Apex-linked positions and global liquidity shifts. The report was incomplete, but dangerous, because it proved something fundamental. Apex was not just predicting markets. It was influencing them, even indirectly. That changed everything. Daniel read the report alone in his office. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Who are you?" Not to the report, not to his team, to the unknown entity behind it. For the first time in years, Daniel Harper was not confident. He was curious, and curiosity, in finance, is often the first step toward obsession. Emily stood in front of her apartment window that night. City lights stretched endlessly. Noah and Lily were asleep. Victor had left hours ago. Argus was running simulations in the background. She watched the screen, watched the system, watched the world respond to it. "You're becoming too big," she whispered. Argus did not answer, but the numbers kept moving. Across Manhattan, Daniel received another update. A new data point. Apex Quant Capital had entered a new position, contrary to every major institution, against consensus. High risk, high conviction. He stared at it, then smiled slightly. "Finally," he said. "Something I can see." He leaned forward. "Let's find out what you are." And for the first time, the hunter believed he had found the trail, not knowing he was already inside the game, not knowing the game had been running for years, and not knowing the person he was chasing had once held his children alone in a hospital room while he signed away her world. The invitation arrived on a plain white envelope. No logo, no signature. Just a time, a place, and 2 words. Apex Quant, Daniel Harper held it between 2 fingers like it might disappear. "Is this a joke?" he asked his assistant. "No, sir. It came through a private legal channel." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "From who?" "We couldn't trace it." That alone made him accept it. The building was not listed in any public directory as Apex's headquarters. No branding, no press presence, no trading floor visible from the street. Just glass. Tall, quiet, reflective glass that made the entire city look like it was watching itself. Daniel stepped inside. The lobby was empty, no receptionist. Only a single elevator that was already waiting. He didn't press a button. It closed on its own. At the top floor, the doors opened into silence. A boardroom stretched across an entire wall of glass overlooking Manhattan. And at the head of the table, Daniel stopped walking. Emily Carter was sitting there, calm, composed, unmoved, not surprised, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment for 10 years. Beside her sat a young boy, reading quietly. Daniel didn't recognize him at first. Then his eyes dropped to the child's chest. No machines, No wires, just life. His breath caught. Noah? The boy looked up. Hi. Daniel stepped back slightly. You? He couldn't finish. Emily gestured calmly to the seat across from her. Sit down, Daniel. Hearing his name from her mouth after so many years hit differently. He sat, slowly, carefully, like the room might collapse if he moved too fast. For a long moment, no one spoke. Daniel looked at her. Really looked. Not the hospital version, not the memory, not the idea he had buried under years of success. This was different. This was control. Built. Earned. Weaponized discipline. You own Apex, he finally said. Emily nodded. Yes. His jaw tightened. That's impossible. She tilted her head slightly. You used to say that about market crashes, too. Silence. Noah quietly returned to his book. Daniel leaned forward. Do you know what your fund has done to my firm? Emily replied without hesitation. Yes. Another silence. You targeted us. No. Her voice was steady. You exposed yourself. Daniel's face hardened. This is personal. Emily finally looked directly at him. That was the first emotional shift in the room. Barely noticeable, but real. It stopped being personal, she said quietly. The day you signed divorce papers in a hospital room. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Daniel swallowed. That was years ago? Yes, she replied. And every year after that, you got promoted. A pause. And I raised your children alone. Noah shifted slightly, but said nothing. Daniel tried to regain control. I didn't come here for this. Emily nodded. I know. You brought me here to negotiate. Yes. Then negotiate. Emily slid a folder across the table. Daniel opened it. His eyes scanned the numbers. Liquidity structure, asset acquisition terms, valuation model. He frowned. This is a takeover offer. No, Emily said calmly. It's the price of survival. Daniel looked up sharply. You're dismantling my firm. I'm absorbing it. For what reason? Emily paused. For the first time, her voice softened slightly. Because your investors didn't deserve collapse. Silence again. Even Daniel couldn't argue that. He leaned back, shaken but trying to hide it. This isn't just finance, he said. This is revenge. Emily didn't respond immediately. Then she spoke quietly. If it was revenge, she looked at Noah. You wouldn't be sitting here. Daniel followed her gaze. For the first time, he really saw the boy. Alive, healthy, present. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in something long buried. I didn't know, he said. Emily didn't blink. You didn't ask. The words landed heavier than accusation. They landed like fact. Daniel's voice lowered. I made mistakes. Emily nodded once. Yes. A pause. But mistakes usually cost the person who makes them. Her eyes didn't leave his. Not the people who depend on them. Silence stretched. Even the city outside seemed distant. Daniel looked at the acquisition documents again. His voice was quieter now. If I refuse? Emily answered instantly. Then Apex still absorbs your exposure. And my firm collapses. Yes. Collateral damage? No. She leaned forward slightly. Correction. That word again. Market language. Clean. Cold. Unavoidable. Daniel exhaled slowly. You really became this. Emily tilted her head. I survived you becoming what you became. That hit harder than anything else in the room. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he looked at Noah again. Does he know? Emily followed his gaze. He knows enough. Noah smiled faintly. I know Mom builds the future. Daniel looked away. Finally, Daniel closed the folder. What do you want from me? Emily paused, then answered honestly. Nothing you can give. A silence followed that was different from the others. Not tension, resolution. She stood. The meeting was over. Noah, she said softly. The boy closed his book and stood. He walked to her side naturally, like this was always where he belonged. Daniel watched them, a mother and son, not broken, not lost, rebuilt. As they reached the door, Daniel spoke once more. Emily? She stopped, did not turn. I'm sorry. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emily replied without looking back. I know. And she left. Daniel sat alone in the glass room. The city stretched endlessly beyond him. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was at the center of it. He felt outside of it, watching a world he no longer controlled. And somewhere beneath that realization was the unsettling truth: he had never lost a market war. He had simply never realized he was already in one. The day Apex Quant Capital changed the financial world, nothing looked different at first. Markets opened on time. Coffee machines and trading floors hissed as usual. Analysts argued about interest rates. News anchors smiled into cameras. It looked like an ordinary Tuesday. Until 9:42 a.m. At Rose and Apex headquarters, alarms didn't go off. There were no alarms. Argus simply updated its dashboard. Then paused, then recalculated. Victor leaned over Emily's shoulder. What is it? Emily didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then she whispered, This is it. Across the global financial system, something unusual was happening. Not a crash. Not yet. Something quieter. Liquidity tightening in 5 regions simultaneously. Credit spreads widening in patterns that didn't match any historical model. Shipping delays aligning with commodity shortages. Insurance premiums adjusting before claims were reported. Markets weren't reacting. They were synchronizing, like a system realizing something all at once. Daniel Harper stood in a glass conference room at his firm when the first alert arrived. Global liquidity distortion detected. He frowned. What does that mean? The analyst hesitated. It means the market is moving together. Daniel leaned forward. That's impossible. But even as he said it, he already knew something was wrong. Emily watched Argus evolve in real time. For years, it had predicted fragments. Now it was seeing the whole structure. Not individual markets, not sectors, the entire system. And the system was unstable. Victor spoke quietly. If this continues... Emily finished the sentence. It becomes a cascade. A pause. Then she added, not a crash. A reset. Noah entered the room carrying his school tablet. Mom? Emily didn't look away from the screen. Yes? Why is everyone on TV scared? She finally looked at him. On the muted screen behind him, financial news anchors were speaking faster than usual. Charts flashing red, graphs breaking patterns. Emily hesitated, then answered gently. Because the world is changing. Noah frowned. Is it dangerous? Emily looked at Argus, at the predictions converging into a single outcome line, then back at her son. Yes, she said honestly. For some people. At Daniel's firm, panic began quietly, then all at once. Positions were failing across desks. Risk models were misfiring. Liquidity buffers collapsing faster than expected. Who is doing this? Someone shouted. No one answered. Daniel stood still, not moving, watching. Patterns again. Always patterns. Then he saw it. A signature behavior profile buried in the flow. Adaptive prediction timing. Preemptive position shifting. Probability weighting that adjusted before events occurred. His breath slowed. No, he whispered. It's them. He grabbed his phone. Get me Apex Quant. His assistant hesitated. They don't take calls. Then get me whoever does. At Apex, the call arrived. Victor looked at Emily. She didn't react. She already knew. She tapped the screen once. The line connected. Daniel's voice came through. Not arrogant, not confident, different, focused. Emily. A pause. I know it's you. She replied calmly. Yes. Silence. Then Daniel. What are you doing? Emily looked at the cascading models, at Argus, at a system that had outgrown its original design. We're stabilizing the market, she said. Daniel's voice sharpened. You're disrupting the entire financial system. Emily nodded slightly. Yes. Another silence. Then Daniel. People will lose everything. Emily replied. People already lose everything. A pause. Then softer. You just never saw them. Victor leaned in slightly. This is beyond exposure now. Emily knew if Argus fully executed its current trajectory adjustments, trillions in capital would be reallocated. Some funds would collapse, others would survive. The system would rebalance, painfully, inevitably. Daniel's voice dropped. Tell me what you want. Emily hesitated. For the first time in years, she looked away from the screen, at the window, at the city, at everything she had built this for. Then she answered, I wanted a system that didn't punish people for being unaware. A pause. But the system only understands risk. Daniel spoke quietly. So this is your solution? Emily shook her head slightly. No. This is its correction. Argus displayed final projection. System instability threshold reached. Global rebalancing probability, 94%. Victor looked at her. This is the point of no return. Emily nodded. I know. He studied her. Do you stop it? She didn't answer immediately. For a long time, she just watched the data. Then she looked at Noah, at Lily, at the life she had built from nothing. Then she looked back at the screen and made her final decision. She typed one command. Not to accelerate, not to maximize, but to soften, to distribute impact, to prevent collapse. Argus paused, then recalculated, then adjusted. The system didn't stop the change, but it reshaped it, from explosion to transition. On global markets, the effect was immediate. Volatility surged, then stabilized. Institutions absorbed losses instead of collapsing. Liquidity shifted instead of vanishing. It wasn't painless, but it wasn't destruction. It was controlled evolution. Daniel watched the screens slowly return to stability. He exhaled. What did you just do? Emily replied quietly. I stopped it from becoming a funeral. A pause. Then Daniel. And what is it now? Emily looked at the data one last time, then answered. A warning that the system needs to learn, not break. Hours later, markets closed, not with celebration, not with collapse, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible. That night, Noah sat beside Emily on the balcony. What happened today? He asked. Emily looked at the city lights, then at him. The world changed direction? Noah thought about that. Did we win? Emily smiled faintly. No. A pause. We guided it. Noah nodded slowly. That sounds harder. It was. Inside, Argus continued running. Not predicting catastrophe anymore, but monitoring balance, learning restraint, learning consequence, learning humanity. Somewhere across the city, Daniel stood alone again. But this time, he wasn't watching the world slip away. He was watching it adjust, and for the first time, he understood something uncomfortable. Emily hadn't beaten him. She had outgrown the system he believed was unbeatable, and the world she built was still only the beginning. Emily Carter closed her laptop, not because the work was done, but because it never would be. She looked at her children, at the city, at everything she had rebuilt from betrayal and silence, and quietly, finally understood. Power was not in predicting the future. It was in deciding what kind of future was worth allowing. And for the first time in her life, she was no longer reacting to the world. She was shaping what it would become next.